Haven't done one of these in a while, but I wanted to answer some questions from the Dolphins fans. A Dolphins mailbag is the topic of this Dolphins Today episode. I am Nic Rohloff. Appreciate everybody submitting your questions. And the first question we'll get to today is from Mason, who asked, when should the Dolphins try to get Tua a backup or potentially finding a replacement long term? Should we be looking towards the draft or free agency, and if the draft, what round? Well, first I'll answer the first part here because they do have a backup, and maybe you missed it. That's very possible this offseason, but Miami signed Zach Wilson from the Denver Broncos to a one-year, $6 million deal, former second overall pick from the New York Jets. Now, is this a long-term play? Probably not, because it's just a one-year deal, and it's just hoping that he can maybe develop, and if Miami likes what they see from Wilson, they can keep him for a year again and extend him potentially. But yes, Miami should be drafting a quarterback, but I don't think it should happen before round 3. There are so many needs for this Dolphins team on the defensive line, offensive line, and the secondary, where quarterback developmental-wise shouldn't be a thought for this Dolphins front office until round 4 or 5. Remember, the Dolphins have 2 fourth-round picks, 2 fifth-round picks. I do anticipate Miami taking a quarterback with one of those 4 picks, whether it's Quinn Ewers, Kyle McCord, Curtis Rourke, Dylan Gabriel. Those are the type of names that we're looking at here. But I don't think you should expect Miami to make a play for Tua's replacement long-term this offseason. That could come next offseason if Tua misses games or struggles in 2025. All right, we have a lot of questions on this mailbag, and if you did not get featured, well, you might have missed the opportunity to even get on the mailbag because we put a mailbag call out on our community page, which means you have to be subscribed to ask questions, see that page. So hit that sub button. We also put out daily content here on the channel, so be subscribed for the latest on the Dolphins. All right, let's move over to BR here. I'm still drafting Will Johnson at number 13, but if Grier can sign a safety in free agency, maybe trade up for a late first-round D tackle. What's your thoughts on this? If you agree, what should we trade in order for the late first-round pick? Well, I've talked about Will Johnson a ton on this channel. I think he is one of my top 3 guys here for the Dolphins to take at pick number 13. That small bubble of 4 prospects has kind of grown on me to be these 4. Will Campbell from LSU, Armand Mambu from Missouri. I think both of them are going to be gone, but if one of those are there, I'm taking one. But the next 2, Will Johnson from Michigan, Kenneth Grant from Michigan. So I'm with you on Will Johnson. I think he blends perfectly with Jalen Ramsey for the now, but also the future at that cornerback spot. But defensive tackle is a huge need. And in our mock draft that we did a couple weeks ago, I took Will Johnson at 13 and then traded up into the first round to take Derek Harmon from Oregon. So this is something that I am very much in on. I am all in on trading up because the Dolphins have 10 draft picks in this draft. They have a bunch of capital for next year as well. So there is a world where the Dolphins kind of sit back after taking someone around at pick 13. Maybe it's Will Johnson, and they see one of those defensive linemen slip, whether it's Kenneth Grant, Harmon, Walter Nolan, and they see him at 25, 26. It's like, we really like these guys. This could be a game-changing player on the D-line next to Zach Sealer. Why not trade pick number 48, number 98 in a 2026 third-round pick? So you trade a 2, a 3, and a future 3 to get back into the first round. You take one of those stud defensive linemen, whether it's Harmon, Grant, or Nolan in the mid to late 20s. You get that fifth-year option with one of those players as well. I would be in on making that type of deal, but it's got to be for the right prospect because this is a deep defensive lineman class where they could wait till 48, take a guy like TJ Sanders from South Carolina, Alfred Collins from Texas. There's a lot of different ways Miami can go about assessing some of these needs in the NFL draft. But what say you? Should the Dolphins trade up into the first round to get another first-round pick in the late 20s or maybe even one of those last picks in 30, 31, and 32? Type Y if you would trade up, type N if you would not. I would type my Ys, but it's got to be a good deal and for a prospect that we like on the defensive line. Ezra with a question. Tyreek Hill leaving to go from the Dolphins to the Cowboys. I know a lot of people either want to trade Tyreek Hill or are wondering if they trade Tyreek. He is not getting traded, guys, and sure, the Cowboys would probably love to add Tyreek Hill. Now, the question is, are they all in? Do they think Tyreek Hill would help elevate them to a contending team in the NFC, pairing up with CeeDee Lamb? It would make that offense a lot of fun, but does that fill all their needs to win? Probably not. And Miami's not dealing them. Remember what we've talked about this offseason with his contract. The Dolphins have a current cap hit with Hill of $27.7 million. If they trade him prior to June 1st, they don't save any money. It actually goes up in cap hit this year to $28.8 million. And sure, they'd save money if they trade him post June 1st, but that doesn't help them this season when the front office and coaching staff needs to win to save their jobs. Tyreek Hill is not being traded before this season starts. I could see him being traded at the deadline potentially if the Dolphins are struggling. We know he will not be on the roster next year due to his $52 million cap hit in 2026, and it's saving Miami $35 million if they cut him, but they will not trade Tyreek Hill before the NFL draft or June 1st. All right, moving over to King Gaming. Do you think Miami could target Desmond Watson from Florida to be their run stopper in short yard situations? Well, Desmond Watson, I've been asked a lot about this guy over the past week or so, ever since he went viral at Florida's Pro Day. Yeah, that is not a typo, folks, when you look at that height and weight combination. 6'5", 450, but he flashed really good speed for his size, doing the 40-yard dash in front of NFL scouts, and a very solid vertical. He is not going to be a player that plays all three downs. Hell, he could barely play one down. But he is such a big player that you have to give it thought, whether it's late day 3 or as a UDFA, to just see if he can come in and be a difference maker for you. Because it's hard to say that, hey, your opponent gets onto the 1 yard line at the 2 yard line and you go to goal line package, trot the big fella out there. He'll eat up a couple blocks, create a lot of space for the linebackers to crash through the gaps. I get there might be a actual roster spot and a role for Desmond Watson. And I think there could be a team to take the kind of gamble on him in late day 3. I'm intrigued, but like I said, it would probably have to be with one of the 3 7th-round picks Miami has. I don't think he goes higher than that. Maybe I'm wrong, but we'll see. Moving over to Channing77, what do we think the floor and ceiling is of this football team? Well, Channing, we appreciate the question, but it's hard to really make that statement because I don't want to be on record saying one thing without knowing where the Dolphins roster is going to be at. What are the biggest needs for the Dolphins after the draft? Do they sign any of these free agents? How do they address needs? Did they get a steal in the draft? It's hard to say. But I'll give you an answer. And I want to preface this right now that this is before the NFL draft and a lot of holes left on this team. The ceiling to me is a divisional round of the playoffs. Maybe, if everything works well for the Dolphins and Mike McDaniel this year, they make the postseason and maybe they finally get that monkey off their back and get a win. But I do not see them winning the second game, whether they have to play the Ravens, whether they play the Bills again, or the Chiefs. I don't see them beating any of those 3 teams as currently constructed, so I think the divisional round is probably their ceiling. The floor could be kind of ugly, I'm not going to lie. If injuries happen to Tua again, and Tyreek Hill regresses, and the Dolphins don't adequately hit on some of these draft picks to fill some of these roster needs on offensive line, defensive line, and the secondary, I think this team could be 5-12. I'm being so serious. If everything goes wrong for the Dolphins, I think the floor is 5-12. You're picking inside the top 10 next year and probably firing Mike Daniel, Chris Grier, and maybe even looking to draft a quarterback next season. So that's the floor. Ceiling is the divisional round. But that could change based after what they do in draft and free agency. All right, some more questions will be answered, but make sure you get your Dolphins draft hats. They're on sale right now at chatsports.com/Dolphins draft hats. Link will be in the description and comments of today's video. Black, cream color, flat brim, curved brim, icon. I like them all. And I really got to be honest. I think these are the better draft hats that the Dolphins have had over the past couple of years. So get yours today. One more time, chatsports.com/Dolphins draft hats. Links in the description and comments. All right, Alex with a question. Considering the Dolphins' history of ups and downs, what has been the most challenging aspect of being a fan? How do you manage expectations each season, and what would it take for the team to regain consistent success? A lot there. The hardest part about being a fan of the Miami Dolphins is just the fact that they are one of the lesser successful teams. They haven't won a playoff game in 24 years. So that's not very fun, especially when you see the Washington Commanders go from second worst team in the NFL to playing in the NFC Championship game. It's like they did that quick turnaround in 1 year. They got rid of their owner, they got a new GM, they got a new coach, they got a new quarterback, and boom, there they are. So it's like, it's not easy, but how hard can it be to get one playoff win over the last 24 seasons? So that's probably the toughest part here. Now, managing expectations is going to be the most difficult part because it's in our nature as fans and as just observers of sports in general to just be optimistic. You go into week one each year, you might know that your team is projected to be a top 10 pick, but you still think, hey, things go right here, we can be in the postseason. So it's tough to manage expectations. I don't do a good job of it, that's for sure. I thought last season the Dolphins were going to go 12-5, win the division, and fight for a run to the Super Bowl because I liked the roster last year. Boy, was I wrong. So I'm not the best person to ask about that, but hopefully they do regain consistent success. The best way to do that, probably build the trenches. Offensive line, defensive line, model after the Philadelphia Eagles. They've been great over the past 8 or 9 years. Why? Great offensive line. They built the defensive line. Probably should follow that route. All right, let's go over to Elite DL with a question. If you were the Dolphins front office, what would be a fair trade in your eyes for the 13th pick? So this is obviously assuming a trade down because I don't see really a player that is a veteran that Miami could go after and trade that 13th pick for. So I did some number crunching, and I came up with this potential offer. Now, it's with the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, I don't know if teams might want to trade up from just a couple picks behind Miami or in the early 20s. But based off the trade value chart, a fair trade for the 13th pick would be pick number 22 in the first round, pick number 55 overall, which is a second round pick, and a 2026 third round pick. So hypothetically here, you could trade back from number 13, get a early 20s first round pick, a mid-round second-round pick, and then a third-round pick in 2026. And I think the Dolphins would have to consider that because with how many needs they have, they can fill now 3 of them. You can go with a Gray Zabel, an interior offensive lineman at 22. You can go with one of the top defensive linemen in either Walter Nolan, Kenneth Grant, and Derek Harmon if they're still on the board at 22. And then pair that up with 2 picks at 48 and 55 on the offensive line, secondary, safety, cornerback. It gives you more flexibility, right? It gives you 3 picks inside the top 60, which is very appealing, and 4 picks inside the top 100 if you factor in the 98th pick. It's something that I would consider if I'm Miami, but if I am a Dolphins fan, I want to preface this. Yes, trading down sounds really, really fun, and it sounds like a good idea. But it is very hard for these trades to materialize. It is, because you got to find a team willing to trade up, willing to meet your price point, and the right prospect to fall that you don't want to draft, that they want to move up and get. I mentioned the Chargers because they could be looking to move up for a running back, whether it's Omarion Hampton or one of these other guys that they really like. Either way, yes, I would consider trading down from 13 if I got that type of offer, but it's got to be the right situation. And I'm not falling probably too far back. Like, I don't want to go back farther than pick 24, 25. All right, before we answer the last question here on today's show, I want to know your top Dolphins draft target. A lot of people will mention Will Johnson, mention Will Campbell, Kenneth Grant. Let me know yours down in the comment section. I don't know who my top one is, but it's definitely one of those 3. I find his final question of today's show comes in from Ellis. What teams would you label as trade partners in this year's draft? Give some trade scenarios you think could realistically happen. Thanks for the content. Appreciate you, Ellis. And I guess we'll kind of like wrap it up into that question that we just answered. The 4 trade partners that I could see Miami working with, if you just think about the first round, because I think projecting trade back and trade ups in the little or the middle rounds in the second, third, fourth, that's just too hard. But if you think specifically with the first round, the Vikings, Chargers, Bengals, and Texans all come to mind. Vikings pick 24, Texans pick 25, Chargers pick 22. I think the Bengals pick around 18. They pick 17. So those kind of ranges is where I'm looking at for teams to move up. But you also got to find the right prospects, as I just mentioned. Like, I see the Vikings and Chargers as options because they have been linked to defensive linemen. They are linked to running backs. And if they believe a team is going to take Omarion Hampton or trade up to get Omarion Hampton, the Chargers and Vikings could move up to get him, the running back from North Carolina. So those are the type of teams that I'm looking at. The Bengals need help on the offensive line. If a player falls like Will Campbell, could the Bengals move up and take him? And with the Dolphins knowing that they need so much other than just the offensive line, move back to the 17th overall pick, go with a corner or defensive lineman there, but also get some draft capital in the middle rounds to help address other positions of need as well. Those are the different options that I think Dolphins could be interested in, which is why I think in the first round you should be looking at the Texans, Bengals, Chargers, and Vikings as 4 potential teams that could trade up with the Dolphins for the 13th overall pick. I appreciate everyone for getting their questions in on today's show. Make sure you are subscribed because we're going to continue to bring you content on the Miami Dolphins every single day. And we will be live for all 3 days of the NFL draft as well. 24th, 25th, 26th. Dolphins have 10 picks. We'll be live breaking down all of them. So join the channel.